We'll start off with Larry being born at Heights Hospital with Dr. Tucker.
Dr. Tucker?
Yep, Sheldon Tucker.
Nobody ever told me that.
Well, I'm telling you now.
Dr. Sheldon Tucker.
Yep.
Really?
And that's Heights Hospital right at the end of Heights and 20th.
Is it still there?
No, it's an old folks' home now.
Oh, okay.
It's all a rest
But
home
it was
of some sort.
It was at the end of Heights and 20th?
That's on the corner. On the
Really?
right-hand corner. Going right against Reagan over there.
Now Debbie was
No.
born at
Yeah.
a different hospital.
Not Reagan. I'm a hog school.
Memorial.
It's right by I'm a hog school, wasn't it? There's a family. They were hogs. I'm a hog. You're a hog. Right?
Dr. Sheldon Tucker.
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Because Debbie was born in St. Joseph. Oh, yeah, along the Gulf Freeway. No, not Memorial.
Mama
There you
says-
go.
Mama said Memorial. Anyway, Debbie don't matter right now. We'll talk about Debbie later.
St. Joseph Hospital, Joanne. Off the Gulf Freeway.
What was it called? Heights Hospital or Heights Memorial or?
Heights Hospital. Heights, I think.
Whatever. That was many years ago.
Yeah. Not too far from Heights Tackle House.
Really?
Yeah.
Heights Tackle House?
That was on 14th, I believe.
I don't remember that either. I remember some places Grandpa showed me. He showed me where the old ice house was and
Yeah.
things like that.
He mouse stew was always around. That was his favorite. We call it mouse stew. What he meant was might as well.
He had little sayings. He'd run a bunch of words together.
I like that band like I did my daddy.
He was something else. Loved to fish.
We built that boat on a homemade planer that we put together. And in the process, he cut this finger. He cut this finger about here. He stuck it. He was pushing the board in and it rattled. Of course, they didn't have nothing holding it down like the new ones do. He caught his finger.
It was on a planer? Okay,
It's a
I thought-
homemade planer. I had it till not too long ago here.
Okay, I thought it was a table saw or whatever. But it was the planer that got his
The
finger.
old planer we made.
Y'all made one.
Yeah.
Wow.
With a half-horse motor. We made that boat from a plan and out of Popular Mechanics. And you were around quite a bit when we were working on it. I don't know if you remember that.
No, I don't.
You tended grandma's chickens and all that.
We're here.
When we moved from Houston, we moved with that old International truck with a homemade trailer behind it, loaded down. Your mama was driving the 59 Chevrolet we had bought,
Forward.
59 Ford, along with Debbie. And who in the heck was driving the truck?
Benny Jr. Benny Landry.
Benny Landry was driving the truck that we rented to haul the wood that Uncle Enoch had got for me to I paid $25 for a whole bunch of lumber that I built the shop over here with.
Oh, that's where it came from?
$25 worth. That's where it came from. Uncle Enoch used to work at a sawmill. That's Uncle Enoch was Joanne's daddy's brother.
Now, what got built first, the shop or the house? Here.
This house?
Yeah. What did you build first, the shop or the house?
The shop. Because we stayed with Mom and Daddy for a year and a half. I don't know if you remember none of that, huh? Debbie?
No, I said I don't remember living with Mama and Papa, but
There was some tough times.
Mama said that we lived with them,
Tight.
and I know Grandpa, he took 2 weeks off from work,
Yeah.
He came over here and framed up the house and all that and blacked it in where y'all could move into it.
But go back a little bit. Uncle Joe's the one that give us the plans for it. But I'm the one that remodeled them so we wouldn't, so we didn't have to have a hall.
Which we got many years later.
Go through the bathrooms. And where our bedroom is at now used to be the front, the living room. It ended up being, when we changed that around, it ended up being the barracks for you and Gary and Larry and Barry.
Because I
we
remember
built-
they had a door.
Uncle Eliezer built that.
I remember they had a door out what y'all
Yeah.
called the front of the house because y'all wanted the front of the house to face the bayou.
Right.
And that was the front at one
Yeah.
time. They had a set of steps and a door and all that, but we never really used that as
No.
the front of the house.
So I got my Uncle Eliezer to build the drawers,
But I remember that. though.
evenly divided. Each one of them had the same thing, identical thing.
I was kind of around when he was doing that. I remember when he was building all of that.
Then we're still working on the house, finishing it while we're living in it.
That went on continuously though.
Yeah. And after we got done, we thought we had it done. Then we remodeled it, and I would quit at 1 o'clock, go to work next day for 7, and you and Mama and Gary and maybe Debbie too would go to the lake over there and dump all that junk out. Sheetrock.
Yeah, go down to Lake Road. They used to have a dump down there.
Mama did all the sheetrocking.
Yeah, her mama did all the sheetrock in the house when we first built it.
But we ripped out all the sheetrock, put up paneling.
And her daddy didn't know nothing about carpenter work. He just knew how to put steel together.
What was it? He used a level, but he didn't use a square. He knew how to use a level.
Yeah.
But had a lot of things that wasn't square.
He was knowledgeable enough.
But he put together a house that we was able to live in, and y'all still living in most of it.
I can still picture my cousin John coming out there, sit under the tree, laying on one elbow and sucking on a piece of grass, watching us work.
Yeah. From across the road over there. Yeah.
You broke your arm on top of that boat one time, that wooden boat that we had made.
Yeah, break it falling out of it.
Falling out, you fell out of it. You had climbed up there, and before I was working on something, and you climbed that up on it, but I didn't see you. Kept watching you before, but you climbed on there without me seeing you, and first thing you know, it slipped off. Broke his arm. I don't know, Dr. Peltier, I think, sent us somewhere to, where's it, Baton Rouge?
That's what Mama said. I don't remember. I think I was 4. I reminded Mama that that was when I was 4. When I was 6, I had pneumonia and I ended up in the hospital right here in Pierre Part.
Yeah.
Dr. Peltier put me in there for a couple of days. I even remember who was. I think they actually had 2 of us in the same room, and the other person in the room was a girl.
One of them country hospitals.
That was Wendy Mobile.
Yeah? I don't remember.
She was in the other bed in the hospital room. I was in there. I had pneumonia. I don't remember what she had, but she was sick too, and she was in the hospital the same time I was. That's Jerome Mobile's sister. She's a year older than me, but she was in the hospital the same time I was, and 6 years old.
It's kind of fuzzy after a while, trying to bring those things up on my own.
I don't know. We mentioned something about fishing. We had a lot of adventures when we went fishing around here for sure.
Huh.
Oh, I fell out of that boat, but We had some adventures in some boats that we had over time. Like the time I told you we went out in the Bay Natchez. I don't know what we were doing, but it was me, you, and Uncle Bubba. And we were out there in the middle of Bay Natchez, and we were coming back home, and it was choppy. And there must have been a wave a little bit bigger than the rest of them, and you hit it in the bottom, between two sections of the ribs, the bottom of the boat popped open, right in front of Uncle Bubba. And the water was drowning him. He couldn't tell you there was a hole in the boat because water was coming up in his face. I must have been sitting behind him or something. I saw it all happen. He couldn't say nothing because the water was coming up, and steering wheel was all the way in the front of the boat. And you were trying to head toward the bank so we wouldn't sink. We got up there, and I think we were sitting on top of the mud or something. And then we ended up bailing as much water as we could out. And you and Bubba jumped on the bottom of the boat and pushed the bottom back down underneath, just the plywood bottom.
Yeah.
And y'all figured out if we stood on it on the way coming back to the house, we could make it back home without getting water in the boat, and it worked.
I was scared the foot was gonna come through. It didn't. That boat reminds me when we used to go berry hunting out in the canal over there.
Oh, boy.
Put a number 3 tub in front of the boat, and I'd ram it in there underneath the berry bush. We'd pick number 3 tub full.
A big long blackberries.
That
And inevitably, there was about 3 or 4 yellowjack nests in them. But he'd ram the boat up there anyway, just so we could get the big. He wasn't worried about yellowjacks. He was worried about the berries. And I remember my grandpa, Mama's daddy, Pawpaw, he used to smoke a pipe. He said, "Don't worry about it." He said, if one of them hit you, he said, "Watch." Yeah, one of them had bit him while we were picking berries, and he'd pull his pipe apart and he'd smear pipe grease on it. And he said,
Yeah.
"See, it's all right now." And I don't know if it worked or not, but he said it did.
Of course, when you picked up that many berries, that means we had to jar them, make jelly out of them.
Oh, jelly and pies.
Yeah, how many pies we made? You remember that, Debbie?
I remember Mama straining berry juice through cheesecloth to make that blackberry jelly.
Boy, we got us into a lot of work then.
I remember
That's labor intensive.
other boat incidents that we had. Well, not necessarily a boat incident, but we went fishing, me, you, and Pawpaw. Ended up going fishing right behind the house over here in the middle of the wintertime. Sockeye were biting. We was catching as many as we could, big ones. But it was so cold, Grandpa got so cold, me and him got off on the bank and built a fire so he could warm up. And Daddy was still out there catching sockeye. Ice on the end of his pole. I said, "Oh, man. They don't bite like that
Dedication.
anymore." Well, my grandpa used to love to fish. I remember me and Pawpaw went one time. It was my papa's new boat. New wooden boat. Somebody had built it for him. Mr. Raymond Setatow built that boat for him. And Papa put his old 20 horsepower Johnson on it. Instead of buying a new motor, he put an old Johnson outboard that he had on his skiff that he had before that. This was a 14-foot flat bottom made out of cypress, but had plywood bottom on it. Well, me and Pawpaw launched that boat right over here on the side. The bayou on the side right here. There used to be a flat spot. It wasn't an improved boat launch, but it was a place we could launch the boat. So me and him would go fishing. Just me and him on that little boat because he loved to go. We launched it right there and went fishing, and we were picking it up. I don't remember if I had the tractor hooked up to it or a truck or whatever, but I was pulling it out, and we had winched the boat up onto the trailer. Oh, we didn't tie it off. We just had it latched with the winch. Well, coming out of the bayou, the hit cypress knees coming out and all that, and there was an old homemade boat trailer that had rollers on it. So the boat didn't just slide up on there, it rolled up on there. So as I was pulling it out, somehow or another, the latch came loose, the boat rolled off the trailer, and it hit the ground. Well, it hit a cypress knee, and it put a hole in the bottom of the boat. Grandpa was all upset. Papa was all upset about that. And we put a hole in my papa's boat. Papa told him, "Don't worry about it, get it fixed." We ended up bringing it to Goose Temple. And Gustav Play cut out a little square out the bottom of it, put a piece of plywood in there with a little piece of cypress over the top of it, and you never know it had a hole in it. But my papa was some upset that we messed up. We didn't tie the boat up, and it rolled off the trailer, and it hit that cypress and put a hole in it.
Where's that boat at now?
I still got it.
Yeah.
That's back when I was a kid. Now I'm still using that boat today. We estimate it was built somewhere around 1971. We're not really sure. It might be before that. But my papa had it, and then Daddy had it for a while. And when I got it, it was set in a shed for 4 years, not being used. I pulled it out of the shed in 1995. Reconditioned it, repainted it, bought a brand new 25 horse Mariner outboard, put it on there, and been using it ever since.
Going back to fishing, we used to catch crabs over here and all kind of crawfish. Well, you can't do that no more. That's the sad part.
I remember going to Bay Natchez. We had some old crawfish cages,
Yeah.
like they used to catch crawfish in the swamp, in the spillway nowadays. Daddy would open up the bottom of that crawfish cage, and he'd hang some kind of bait, like a catfish head or pig lips or whatever it was, right in the middle, in a bait hanger that you'd put on crawfish. But then he'd tie a string on the back end of it, where you actually open it up to empty the crawfish. He'd put a string on there and put a Clorox bottle on the end of it. And you go along the channel in Bay Natchez, and he'd drop it with the spout facing down and the bottom end open, and it'd be floating on that bottle, or that bottle would be the buoy. The trap would actually sit on the bottom. Huh?
Yeah, I had to sit on the bottom.
The trap sat on the bottom. The bottom was
facing down river.
the bottom was the buoy where you could see it, and he'd go, I don't know, so many yards apart, and he'd drop them. And when he dropped the last one, it might be 10 or 12 of them. We'd turn around, he'd turn the boat around, we'd go back, and he'd pass the boat real close where he could grab that bottle for the first one. And he'd grab the bottle and he'd pull it up as fast as he could. And inevitably, there'd be a couple of crabs in it. He'd dump them out in a tub. Then about that time, the next one would come up. He'd grab that next one and pull it up as fast as he can, and he'd dump crabs out of that. And that's how we got crabs, so we boil crabs.
You know that's illegal now?
Yeah. It's illegal, but we caught a lot of crabs like that. I remember Benny Landry wanted to eat some boiled crabs one time. And y'all was talking about going to the Dwaron camp at Bell River.
Yeah.
And he come over here and he said, well, where's the crabs at? Daddy said we had to go catch them. And he said he didn't believe that. So we all took off, went to Bay Natchez, and went and caught a mess of crabs like that, just like we talked about. In them crawfish cages. I don't know, caught a couple of dozen of them, plenty enough to eat. Got back to the house, loaded up everything, went to Bell River to the Dwaron camp and boiled crabs and ate crabs. But he couldn't believe we hadn't caught them yet. He asked Daddy where the crabs. They said, we got to go catch them.
At Point of Joe too, we used to go there and, I don't think we did it too many times. Brought an old iron pot and some chickens, and some oil, and fried that stuff out there right on the point.
I remember that. Had to build a fire to do it. Yeah, we did it over here too. Instead of having a cart with a burner and a propane bottle, Daddy had an old barbecue pit made out of looked like two drums welded together. Big heavy drums. And it was sitting on top of two concrete blocks. Had a grill on it and all that, but you had to build a fire in there to barbecue anything. We didn't buy charcoal back then. We just built a fire and burned it. Well, if we wanted to fry chicken, we built a fire. And Mama had this, I think it was an old electric skillet. And it fit between the two pieces of rebar you had welded right in the middle. And we could set it right there and put oil in it, and we could fry chicken right on the top of it.
Couldn't afford to buy nothing.
I remember boiling crawfish with a wooden fire built underneath them.
Yeah.
Daddy and Papa, we'd go right there by the bayou, right on the side of our house, basically, right there by the bayou. And they had this big, heavy metal drum two handles welded on the side, and it had metal fence posts that made U-shaped legs on it that held it up, and it sat up on those legs, but it sat up about a foot and a half off the ground where you could build a fire underneath it. That's how they boil the water to boil the crawfish. Build a fire underneath that pot and put water in it. So anyway, yeah, we did a lot of things that nowadays we've got an easier way to do it. But back then we did the same things and just did them a little differently because it didn't have to buy it. Figured out a way to do it.
Going back to that time that I thought I almost lost you out of that truck. That was something.
Yeah, we're talking about
I didn't recover out of that right away.
that 49 International pickup
Yeah.
truck. Back then I was small enough where I could stand up on a seat next to Daddy.
Can you imagine that? Him being small enough to sit on top of the seat, to stand up on it.
I was standing on the seat, standing right next to him, and we would take. He was taking a curve about a quarter of a mile here from the house, and he said, I started tumbling out toward the door, and the door opened, and he grabbed me by the seat of my pants and pulled me back in. And he said, "Oh, you almost lost me out of the truck." I don't remember that, but yeah. I remember me and you in that same truck. We ran out of gas. Halfway to the house from the other side of Pierreport, we ended up at Tomplay's Drive-In.
Yeah, I remember Don't Play Drive-In.
You remember where it was at? Yep, right
Yeah.
in the middle of nowhere, really.
Right next to, in fact, it's right in front of Toby's grandpa and grandma's house.
And they ended up actually moving that thing to Pankerville years later. Remember, Sid Pujol ended up having it. But it was over there, right in the middle of nowhere. It was a drive-in, Tomplay's Drive-In. Had the best homemade hamburger. But me and him ran out of gas real close to there, so we got to go inside and get something to drink. I don't know how you end up getting gas, but we ran out of gas in the truck.
About 2 miles from me, 3 miles from me.
That was a little bitty thing. I don't remember. All I remember is we ran out of gas, and it was right there in front of the Tomplay's. Yeah, Mama claims she taught me how to drive a car, which she did. She taught me how to shift and everything and all that. And we knew how to drive before we went to driver's ed in school, which we had in 9th grade. But you taught us how to drive a tractor. That's the first thing we actually drove. Because you always had a tractor around here.
I had that old Alice Chalmers.
You had an older one than that before that one.
I had old International before. Uncle Edmond's old tractor gave
Uncle
me.
Edmond gave you one.
So many things could have happened, accidents and everything. We just didn't know it. Didn't realize it.
But yeah, I mean, we never really had a farm, but it was pretty close.
Didn't y'all like to enjoy that in the afternoon when you come home? My tractor would open them rows over there, ready to pick the potatoes.
Oh yeah. That wasn't the only thing. If it wasn't over here, we had to go help Uncle Edmond dig his potatoes.
Yeah.
Because if my mom and papa were going to Uncle Edmond's to dig potatoes, we went too. Because he had a good sized patch of potatoes we went to dig over there at his house. Buy you corn.
That's who I started working with when I was 15 years old.
I remember that, going to Uncle Edmond digging potatoes.
I gotta say this about Uncle Edmond. Myself and EJ and Raymond, his two boys, were about the same age. The brothers from Baton Rouge used to bring, not the brothers, black people today. I'm talking about the brothers, religious brothers, would bring gifts to everybody in the country from Baton Rouge. The gifts that Raymond and EJ got were boxing gloves. I'll never forget that. I witnessed it. EJ and Raymond started boxing. They were both crying and whimpering, but they kept on at it. And it's still Uncle Edmond's wife would say, Edmond, you better do something about it. They're going to kill each other. He said, let him have at it. Let him have at it. He was easy going. He said, let him do it. They didn't hurt themselves. Never forget that. But we were glad. Maybe it don't fit in at this time. We were glad. I'm telling you that. I told Gary that. They were both very glad and fortunate to help y'all graduate. That I don't think we planned on it. I think we just thought that was our duty to do it. I don't remember having a plan that had to happen. I don't remember that. We just knew that was our duty to have it done, and managed to, all four of y'all. That's a big accomplishment. And seeing today how y'all come out.
Well, we experienced a lot of things on the way getting there.
Yeah.
I mean, not just in our personal life, but some of the things that's going on. Because I'll talk to some of the guys that I work with nowadays about some of the things I did when I was growing up as a kid, and later on as a teenager and all that. And like I talked about with Mom, I said Mom was the one that taught me how to drive and how to milk a cow, and you raise chickens and ducks and rabbits, and you and Papa cows and a couple of hogs, and
We had dogs too. Pee Wee was one of them when I was a deputy.
some of the guys that I work with, even my age, have never experienced some of that stuff. You know, they never raised animals, never learned how to do this or that. Very few of them. I mean, I don't even need one hand to count how many fingers it would take to count how many guys I know that actually say they know how to milk a cow. I know one guy that raises cows.
Yeah.
Obviously, he does. He learned that very young, but he's still in that business. But
It's a very basic living. That's right at the bottom.
a lot of them can't drive anything that doesn't have an automatic transmission on it. It's just they never did it. So we did a lot of things, learned a lot of things.
Hard to remember too many things on the moment.
No, there's a lot of little things that happen here and there. Like growing up, we did a lot of similar things that other boys do.
Yeah.
Me, Gary in particular, because we were closest in age. Because he was 3 years younger than me, and Barry was 4 years younger than him. But me and Gary got in a lot of stuff together, and somehow or another, I don't know, we had this chain-driven tractor. That's back when we still had the fence around the house and the gravel in the front of the yard. And somehow or another, we always wanted to do something with it other than what it was designed to do. So we took that chain-driven tractor and we flipped it upside down, and I was turning the pedals on it with my hand. And Gary was amazed at how that was working with the big tractor wheels turning behind it. So somehow or another, he stuck his finger in the chain and got his finger all mangled up in the chain. And that was a chain-driven tractor. I remember that's what it was. Gary stuck his finger in that chain and got his finger all chewed up on it. No. So we got into that. Our bicycles, like I said, we used to start up at the road and get up as much speed as we can so we can come down in front of the driveway and slam on our brakes. Well, the bicycles back then all had coaster brakes on them. Well, the coaster brake, to make it simple, has a little lever with a little band that clamps around it. And that's the only thing that holds that coaster brake on there. When you slam on the brakes, it puts a bind on that band, and if it breaks, you have no brakes. Well, Gary come down the road one time, and he was hauling ass. He gets close to the fence, and he's getting ready to slam on the brakes and kick it sideways, see how much gravel he can throw. When he slammed on the brakes, the coaster brake failed, and he ended up into the fence. all mangled up in the fence. We used to build ramps. We'd go. Now we wouldn't steal it because they didn't go anywhere, but we'd go take some of Daddy's wood and we'd build us a ramp and see how high we could jump them with our bikes.
See, I don't know all that. Coming out.
He used to work on outboard motors in his old lawnmower shop. So inevitably, he'd have the covers that fit on top of the motor. Well, whenever it rained, that ditch right there would fill up with water, but it wasn't as deep as it was now. It was before it got dug out. It was relatively shallow, but it was a nice place for the water to accumulate. So me and Gary would tie a string on the front of that cover, flip it upside down, and get inside. We'd pull each other, and that would be our boat. We'd ride each other in an upside down cover of an outboard motor. I remember the Evinrudes didn't work too good because they went together in halves. A lot of water would get inside it, but we used a Johnson, like Papa's old outboard motor. A 20 Johnson had a flat fiberglass cover.
That was downstream in the ditch from Papa's outhouse that was over the ditch.
Yeah.
Gary threw a hammer at you.
Oh. So anyway, we drag each other around in those outboard motor covers, and it made a fun boat. And the biggest thing we do is not necessarily pulling each other back and forth. We just want to see how much of a wave we would make. We see if we could throw a kudos.
A lot of imagination in those days.
we made up a lot of stuff. I mean, but it was fun. We did a lot of that kind of stuff.
What about the trip from Houston? Every time we'd go back and forth, what happened over the Sabine River?
Oh, about holding our nose?
Well, two of y'all holding those, and
It depends on which way we were going.
three and then three. 3 Louisianians and 3 Texans.
I remember riding to Houston in that old truck. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think I was sitting on the floor. And it didn't have air conditioning. All it had was a pop-up vent right in front of the windshield, right in the middle of the truck on the outside, on the top. They had a vent. If you'd pull a lever, it would pop open a vent, and that's how the air would flow through it. It was ventilation from the outside. That was how you got air conditioning.
That's before I-10.
Yeah.
A long way. Hot. You had to roll the windows down. And the dew in the night air would get all your hair wet and everything else. Face. No air conditioning.
Oh, I was reminded about something. Me and Gary had a project going on together. Right? It was right down the side of the house, close to the bayou, which now is pretty much underwater. But back then it wasn't underwater. It had a bunch of cypress trees. And there was 4 of them that was apparently pretty close together that made the corner post for a little camp that we built. So we took a whole bunch of scrap lumber and all that, and we threw together a camp where you could actually crawl inside of it. I think we even slept in it one night, or almost did. But you could nail it between the cypress trees, and that made the corner post to build a camp. Apparently one day we had a disagreement about how the camp was going together. And somebody said I had to tell this story, so we had a disagreement about how the camp was going together. So we got to arguing about something. So I told him I didn't want to work with him no more. I was going to tell Mama on him. So I took off. He got mad, and he grabbed a hammer and he threw it. Well, he didn't know he was throwing it at me. Apparently, he just took it and he slung it. When he did, a hammer hit me on the side of the head, and he busted my head open. I think I was 11 or 12.
But Gary would throw things.
He'd get mad, he'd just pick up something and throw it. Well, that was a hammer that time. I think I was 11 or 12 years old. Like I said, he was 3 years younger than me. When he slung that hammer, hit me on the side of the head, and I looked over back at him, and I seen him jumping up and down and crying and shit, and I didn't know why he was doing it until I touched my head, and I looked, I saw blood everywhere, so I started jumping up and down and crying. Then I took off and came to the house. Told Mama Gary threw a hammer at me, hit me in the head. That split my head open on the side. That's where my hairline is. That's where I part my hair nowadays. to this day, that's where I part my hair at, right there where that scar is. Had to take 6 stitches in my head. Dr. Peltier. So y'all happy?
Dr. Peltier was a friend, besides being our doctor. We saw a UFO together patrolling one night, and he said, "You need to report that." I said, "You do it. You're the professional here." We didn't do it. There was a light in the western sky at the end of Bell River over there. We saw it, zing like that. I'm talking about a wide area, real quick. Wasn't no helicopter. Nobody else knew about it then.
I remember going to Dr. Peltier had a camp
Yeah.
down Bell River. And I remember we used to go to his camp. I think that was the first time I ever tried eating boiled crawfish. I didn't care for them none back then. I don't know why, but I must have been a little bitty. But I remember we went over to his camp and he invited us to come eat boiled crawfish. And all we want to do is run around the woods and play around the yard and stuff. And I remember he had a little aluminum boat. I think it had a 10 horsepower Mercury. And he had a bigger boat. And we used to run a crab line out there. We'd string out a crab line with catfish heads and go catch crabs right there in Bell River.
The river had a lot of crabs.
Right off his dock, though. We'd leave right there and just go across the river.
When I'm kind of jumping around here, but at least I want to put that in. When you went to build your house, Albert dumped all that dirt on there, and he wanted to dump even some more but then you told him it was enough. But that dirt was I think Carol remembers that too, how black and muddy it was. His bulldozer I was driving got stuck in that thing. I couldn't hardly get it out, if you remember. Trying to make that thing, plain. Trying to get it flat. And he kept saying, "You need some more dirt, you need some more dirt."
I ended up getting stuck with it one time on the side where the driveway's at. Right up against the side of the
right
shed.
there.
Remember, I couldn't get it out. I had to get Rodney Hebert with his dump truck full of dirt.
Yeah.
Hooked up a chain to the back of it and pulled me out. I got a bulldozer stuck, believe it or not.
That same bulldozer is what I'm thinking. We must. There's a picture. I'll put it that way. There's a photograph taken of me riding Kevin on my leg while I'm driving the bulldozer. I don't think Kevin remembers that. 'Cause I talked to him about it not too long ago. While I'm using the dozer. He never said nothing. He just sat down, man. No problem. But 3 years old, I think. You weren't scared?
I guess we were. Cause he was talking about Kevin. He was born 2 years after we built the house. Huh?
Yeah, but I always had the doors around there from one thing or another.
Cause we built the house in 1986, and Kevin was born in '88. At the time, all we had was a little dachshund, Houston dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a little dachshund. And then Kevin was born in March of '88. And then Kelly was born in November of '89, right? 17 months apart, something like that. 19 months.
You mentioned a while ago putting the black paper on the house. Me and Gary had tied a big heavy-duty rope, manila rope, on one side of the house so we could throw it over the roof so we could hang on to it while we were nailing the paper.
Yep.
And at one time, my ankle gave way. And we both slid down almost to the edge and didn't go over. Stopped it in time. You remember that?
Yeah, I think it was late at night. 'Cause we worked a lot of nights
No.
till early in the morning, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning sometime.
Lightning struck Barry.
You remember when Gary was building that his the warehouse in the back? Talking about the where you work the building in the back of the house. You were helping him build it.
Barn?
Yeah, the barn.
Oh, yeah,
And something happened.
the first place he
You
ever
got
lived.
your hand
man.
squeezed or something. And it was a little going on a little rough at that time. You remember that?
You talking about at Gary's place?
Yeah,
Gary's barn?
barn.
I remember Bud Russo nailing a nail through his hand. I don't remember nothing else about it.
Something is going on. I don't remember exactly what. But you worked the long hours on that thing.
Yeah, I remember Bud passing a nail through his hand with the nail gun. He stopped long enough to pull the nail out, and he kept on going. That's when we were putting the rafters up on it. We're putting the rafters up, so we're trying to get a roof on the damn thing. I know what it was. We built trusses. We built trusses on the ground,
Yeah,
and Gary hired a sign truck. Bayou Sign.
yeah.
He hired a sign truck, and he had it for so many hours. The longer he kept it, the more he paid for it. So he wanted to put up them trusses as fast as he could. So we had to get the first one lined up just right and plums, because all the rest of them followed suit. And I think we were in such a hurry to get them put up there when Bud was trying to put a spacer between one and the next one. That's when he ended up putting a nail through his hand. And that's why he knew Gary was renting that truck by the hour, so he just pulled a nail out and kept on going.
Gary always knew how to get something. Keep it moving.
Oh, I remember when Gary bought that backhoe from one of the guys we worked offshore with.
Yeah.
That was a constant project. I don't know how he finally got rid of it, but the guys that had it knew it was a project when he bought it. But he bought it. He had a backhoe for a little while. But anyway, yeah, the kids
But
were.
you're talking about that incident at the powerhouse too? You and that other nigga?
Well,
We used a station wagon. That the one after Debbie got in a wreck with it. I put some skids on it so it wouldn't catch on to the road.
the reason why he put the skids on it is so he can get off and on the ferry.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we had to cross the ferry in Plaquemine. We'd cross from the Plaquemine side to the other side. And when he would drive off of the ramp onto the ferry, the bottom would drag. But that's why he put some pipe skids on it. He could skid right on there. So we used that, and I worked with him one winter. And I remember it was in the middle of the winter time because we were running bare copper ground wire all around the plant, and we were tying it into the fence. They wanted to ground the fence.
We had to go bore under the street.
I remember
homemade
carrying.
bore and a house jack. Remember that?
Yeah, it's something Say Electric come up with on their own. We'd have to get down in a ditch, and we'd put a pipe, and it would clamp into this jack assembly, and you had to pump it just like a hydraulic jack, and it had a missile, a pointed piece of pipe screwed onto the end of the pipe, and you pointed it to the dirt that was covering a culvert, and we went on the side of it, and that's how we bored underneath that roadway because they wouldn't let us cut the roadway up. We had to bore underneath it, and the way we did it is by forcing a piece of pipe with a pointed end on it, using a hydraulic jack to pump it across the road. So they put Daddy was a foreman on that job. He had a tractor that had it had like a ditch witch attachment on it, on the back of it. Wherever we would lay that ground wire, he could trench until we got to a place where the road was crossing it with a culvert. Then we'd have to bore underneath it with a pipe. Well, he had 2 laborers and myself, who was a winter help. So me and the 2 laborers, who happened to be of a different orientation than I was, skin color wise, put the 3 of us in a ditch, and we'd pump that pipe underneath the road. Well, I was over there just for the wintertime. One of them brothers was in there. He was an older guy. Had experience. The other guy thought he was better than that. Oh, Bruce. Remember Bruce?
Yeah. How about Lionel?
Lionel was the older guy. Bruce was the guy that thought he was better than that, but he had to do it.
What happened when they changed the fan belt on the truck car?
Oh, Lionel mentioned one time about how his brother-in-law had come over and he had wanted to change the fan belt on his car or something like that. And Lionel was under the hood and the brother-in-law was sitting there in the driver's seat. And Lionel told him to turn the engine over, just bump it. So he bumped it. And Lionel had his hands over there, he was checking the belts. Well, brother-in-law bumped the key one time and when he didn't tell him to, and he got his finger caught in the belt as he was rolling the engine over. And he hollered at it, but he said, "Quiet, shut it off, shut it off." What happened, brother-in-law? Got my finger caught in the bed. He said, "Hey, cuz, did it hurt?" "No, cuz, it don't hurt."
Everything was bleeding.
Yeah, and he got his finger caught between the belt and the pulley. He told me that didn't hurt. And his brother-in-law asked him if it hurt. Cuz, it hurt? "No, cuz, it don't hurt." He told that story while we're in the ditch, pumping this piece of pipe under the road. Yeah, that was the time.
Working for a good man, that brother-in-law, as his name, his nickname by it was the superintendent of Sayre. Yeah, Sayre.
Working out of the rolling shack.
Yep. Did what we had to.
Yeah, well, that was one of the jobs I had working between college semesters. Anybody else that would go on spring break, they'd go party down in Florida. I was pulling wire or bending pipe or doing something somewhere.
I remember the old man when you were too young to work, Mr. Bro. We call him old because he was 65 years old. And he said, "Don't worry about that." He said, "I'll take care of the payroll." He said, "Just let him come to work. Just take care of him. Don't worry about it." Because they were too young to work. Something would have happened there to one of them. They would have buried Sayre Electric and the plant and everything.
But we did things back in those days that you can't do nowadays. They wouldn't even allow me in the plant.
Mm-mm.
The contractor wouldn't even hire me, bro, because I wasn't old enough. You'd have to prove you're at least 18 years old. They wouldn't let you in there. But I was working in a full-blown operational fertilizer plant. And like I said, it wasn't just building it. It was operational at the time. It was working. And every now and then they'd have an ammonia release into the atmosphere, and you had to put on a mask. If not, it'd burn your insides up. So didn't really have any training or nothing like that. They just handed you this mask and said, "Hey, if you ever hear that alarm go off and you smell that smell, they said, put this thing over your face and that's how you breathe."
I don't think they had OSHA in them days.
They may have, but we didn't get any formal training on it. They just said, "Here, you're going to need this." I didn't have any sinus trouble working that summer. Got caught in an ammonia release a couple of times.
Things change all the time.
But it was an experience, though. Oh, I learned how to take a nap by leaning a V-guard hard hat against the side of a tank and put your hands behind your back and lean into the tank. Learned that from Freddie.
That's something what you learn from them old fellas at the plant.
Yep, found a good way to take a nap standing up. Put your hands behind your back, lean into a tank with the V guard. That didn't happen very often. I found out what it was like to get a lunch at Tom and Babe's. You got whatever they thought you ought to have. You could order a hamburger fully dressed, and you got one that had mustard and onions on it, because that's how Daddy ordered it every day. If I wanted one different, didn't matter what I said. You was gonna get one mustard and onions.
Tom was behind the counter, and Babe was the fella walking around like the old mafia pictures with a apron halfway down, not up. And then what he'd do if a spoon or a fork had something on it, just take his apron up and wipe it off, put it back on your table. Spaghetti and meatball was the best thing they had him.
The old man, that's why he wanted to go eat lunch there. We didn't bring a lunch. We went to eat at Tom and Babe, me, Daddy, and the old man.
That's in Donaldsonville.
Yeah, it was in Donaldsonville, and that's so Freddie could sleep. Freddie would sleep in the shack, and us three would go to town, because the old man wanted to go to town. Because he'd go eat at Tom and Babe's every day, and then we'd walk down the street to the drugstore, and he'd get him a chunky.
Yeah.
Little square piece of chocolate candy. So if the old man bought a chunky, you bought one. You didn't buy something different. You bought what he bought.
We always did what the old man wanted. It was good to us.
It's a good thing I like the hamburger with mustard and onions, because that's what I got most of the time.
Freddie used to meet him at his house, at the old man's house. And it was still kind of dark, not daylight yet. So Freddie would try to pick a few pecans. I can still see it today. He would pick up a few pecans on the ground. The old man said, them things ain't no good. He threw the whole thing out. I said, why you done that, Freddie? He said, because the old man knows better.
He's talking about the old man. That's kind of how I got my start in industrial electrical work. Because
Well, we learned a lot from that old man now. I did.
he would let you do things that was actually beyond your training, because he wanted you to learn. He figured that's how you learn, is by doing, not just by helping and handing something to somebody. He'd let you do things. But if he was one of them working foremen. I mean, he had his tools too.
Yeah.
And the only reason I remember that is because he pulled out a set of Klein 9 1/4 offset side cutters.
Yeah.
And before he used them, he showed them to me, just to remind me. He said, see these? Son, they older than you are. And then he'd use them. He'd do whatever he got to do. And he'd tell you. If ever he pulled a tool out of his pocket and he knew it was older than you are, he'd tell you. These are older than you are.
He was a character. Really was. And somebody you didn't mind being with.
But it was a learning experience, and believe it or not, it learned a lot of things that I used years later, and taught other guys about it.
Yeah,
And
one thing in particular.
Reminded them where I learned it at. But he's talking about
Tightening the wire. You learned that from him?
tightening up
Yeah.
stranded wire under a lug or under a screw. Oh, how many times I've showed people that offshore. I even showed a trainee of mine one time. I had a little black guy who was a trainee, fresh out of college, 2 years. He had a lot of common sense, though, because he worked with his daddy. His daddy was an electrician, so he kind of came up the way me and Gary did. His name was Sidney. But me and Sidney was troubleshooting a problem with a motor one time when we took the covers off the motor starter. And I told him, I said, it sounds like the motor's drawing too much current, probably because it got a loose connection. But I said, watch, we're gonna find out. Well, the wire's coming from the motor, hooked up to 3 terminals on the bottom of the starter. And before I even pulled the screwdriver out, I said, Sidney, watch this. Let me show you something. I grabbed a hold of one of those wires and I shook it back and forth. Took about 20 seconds. Sounded like a while, but took about 20 seconds. I shook it back and forth and I pulled the wire right out. Well, he looked at me and said, damn. He said, that wire come right out of there. I said, yeah, I had to shake it, but I said, it just to show you it wasn't tightened up properly. They didn't seat the strands on it. So I put it back in there and I tightened it up and I shook the wire while I was tightening it up and I showed him how that works. I said, chances are the other two are loose too. I said, well, I'm not going to pull them out, but we're going to tighten them up. I said, see that I showed you right there? I said, I learned that many years ago. I said, that old man showed that to me. Not my old man, an old man that I work with my daddy, showed us how to seat strands of wire under a terminal. And I said, I remember that to this day because it applies.
That was just one of the things that you learned from that old man. Just
yeah.
to show you from experience.
One of the many. Oh, taping up wire nuts. Just to make sure they didn't fall off. Put tape around it. Making up motor leads.
He always used to tell her, don't go eat at the Piccadilly. I said, why? He said, I've been working back there a long time ago in the American district and their equipment back there. He said, you ought to see the rats and everything that's walking around in the back. He was talking about the old days when the inspector didn't go in there. He used to work for Standard, I think was the name of the company he worked for when he started doing refrigeration work. That's when he used to go back there before he did electrician.
There was a lot of things we learned from the old timers, though.
He's one character, boy.
They don't have too many of those people around nowadays. The younger guys coming straight out of school, think they know everything. And if they give you time to work with them, then they realize that you got a lot to offer. This one little guy I'm talking about, good possibility in the near future I'll end up working for him.
Who's that?
Sidney, my trainee from many years ago.
Oh, yeah.
The position he's in right now is where I'm going, and
Oh, yeah, that's the one
That's
did
him.
you train?
yep.
Well, that's a good thing.
But everybody that I've talked to since
That's 360 there.
that time, everybody I talked to said that I must have trained him right. They said he's done well. They said he's really a good kid. He got a good head on his shoulders. He made his way up through the company. So
I turned a few apprentices loose that done good. Earl Como was one of them. He bought out the family company, Como Brothers Construction, and that's what he's doing. He's the head of it right now. He's got all kind of work in Plaquemine. And he was an apprentice with me when he turned out. I worked with the whole family. I worked with their grandpa. That's how I started off.
with their grandpa.
Yeah, with their grandpa at Dow. It was Mr. Gautreau, that was his name. That was Ralph's mama's name. And then later on when I got the Alamania plant, Triad Alamania plant, then I got Earl with me. And I worked with Ralph 15 months at Big Cajun. That's where you and Gary ended up picking up after the job was over with, y'all picked up wire and all the equipment and everything else. That's where Gary made your boss, wasn't it?
Well, that's how they made him the boss over the Teamsters and everything. That was Bob Bosley.
Yeah. Bob made Gary boss over the Teamster and the backhoe operator and you and who else was there? What Gary was doing, he was recording the amount of wire left on some reels and the number of the reel. That's what it was. That was an experience over there too. How long y'all worked over there?
Gary worked over there longer than I did. I only worked over there one summer, I believe it was. Gary had worked over there before, though, longer than I had.
Gary was the most experienced one.
Over there he was, for sure.
Gary had what was it about Gary when y'all first started? They didn't think that he knew as much as he did because you were older and they knew that you had gone through the full 4 years and Gary had only 2 years.
Oh, it's when we first started offshore. I was 24, I believe. I was 24 years old, and Gary was barely 21, if not. I don't think he was. No, Gary hadn't made 21 yet. He made 21 the month we hired on. And when he first showed up, the electrical foreman sent us each to a different field. The field they sent him to, they told him who to report to when he got there, which was the foreman on the platform, the operation foreman. And when Gary got there and he asked where that guy was, and he found his office, and he told him that he was told to report to him. And the foreman told him, well, the galley's that way. He thought he was the galley hand when he saw Gary the first time, because he looked so young, he figured he was the galley hand.
Yeah.
They told him to report to him.
I didn't know that.
That's where the guy was telling him, but the galley's that way. He was pointing at no. He says, I'm not a galley hand. He says, well, what are you here for? He says, I'm your new electrician.
They didn't believe it.
They didn't believe it.
He looked so young.
I don't know. I'm guessing. I don't remember. But I think they ended up calling the office in Morgan City just to find out if he was telling the truth or not. Because he told him Neil Willett, who was the electrical foreman, sent him out there as his new electrician, and they had to do some checking because they didn't believe him.
What they didn't know is that he had a lot of experience under him.
No, they didn't know that. Me and Gary never worked offshore before. First time we went, it's first time for everything. But we had a lot of industrial
Yeah, but
experience.
yeah, your basics.
We had a lot of industrial experience. We'd worked in chemical plants, refineries, power plants, a steel mill. We'd worked a lot of different places. A lot of guys had never seen.
Ammonia plants.
A lot of guys never saw them places before.
Remember the mobile gas plant you worked at on
Yep,
the river? Yeah, no, on the other side of the river.
yep,
For Ralph. That's Ralph Como had that job.
yep. You was a welder on that job.
Yeah, the welder.
Yep,
Yep.
I remember that one. So we did a lot of things, a lot of different little jobs like that, kind of, I guess, preparing us for where we eventually ended up.
Do you remember Henry? What's his name? The fella from North Carolina. You remember working with him anytime? You met him since when we went to North Carolina. South
Carolina.
South Carolina. You met him. You and Carol met him.
Now, I remember the things that he talked about, but I don't ever remember working with him.
I don't remember him either.
But he mentioned something about us going to Bay Natchez and catching crabs.
And we
He
went
des- he
on
des-
Joe to cook chickens over there.
He described how he did that. Unless you were there, you wouldn't know that.
That's strange.
Yeah, that was kind of strange. But, we worked so many different places over the years. Learned a little bit about this and that. One summer, me and Gary worked at McDermott
Yeah.
in the pipe yard, the West Yard, where they used to roll flat plate into pipes. And that was a different environment, working over there. I guess a lot of our history has to do with work-related things, different places we worked, different things we did, but we learned a lot, met a lot of different people. A lot of it was through friends of the family or friends we had made for one reason or another like this, and that helped us get our foot in the door, put it that way. I don't think anybody actually ever gave us a job. They may have gave us the opportunity. They said, okay, look, if you want to go to work over there, I'll make it available to you. But once we got there, we had to show we knew what we were doing.
That Bayou Steel was one of them.
The Bayou Steel, we ended up getting in there because one of the guys that worked with us with Brown and Root got laid off before me and Gary did. And he found out they needed some hands to build a crew. And the company was looking for some people, and they were having a hard time finding them. We stayed in touch with the guy, and he told us, says, hey, man, I got a job if y'all want one. He said, the guy's looking to build up a crew. I told him I got some partners that's getting laid off with Brown and Root. So we showed up. They hired us on.
Clean job, very clean job. White
Yep.
coats and everything.
Phew.
The opposite.
That was Wayne Charley called us up
Yeah.
and told us that they needed some hands over there working for Bayou Maintenance. for a 2-week turnaround. We went over there for 2 weeks and ended up over there 2 months. That was an experience.
Well, I gotta say this. We're gonna end this thing, I guess. But I'm glad of my family. Proud of them. Gotta say that each time.
Well, when I talked about a lot of things that I've talked about, it was work related, and that's not because we didn't do things on our off time. I mean, when we were younger, yeah, Daddy worked 2 jobs, so he wasn't home a lot. But when he was, like I said, we had a lot of adventures going fishing. A lot of things that we did around here, whether or not it was leisure time or not, we ended up remodeling this house. I don't know how many times. Like you said, the whole time we lived here, we were working on it. So we spent time together, even though it wasn't leisure time. And a lot of times we ended up working together. Even though we weren't at home, we were on a job together. So there was a lot of different experiences like that. Like the time we were at the Exxon refinery, when Slim Nettles was talking about driving in California, and people shaking their fist at him because he was driving too slow. And the cops even pulled him over. And he said, "Officer, what did I do wrong?" The cop says, it's not that you're doing anything wrong. He says, "You're not doing what everybody else is doing."
Yeah.
He said, if the speed limit is 55 and everybody's driving 70, I expect you to drive 70. Yes, sir.
And he said I had 2 bad tires on my trailer in the back, hoping it'd hold up.
We worked with some characters over the years, though.
He was the one that used to make them squirrels out of a peach kernel, peach pit. Remember they used to work it out with a knife? He was in charge of the wire pulling crew. That's why he had all the time in the world to do that.
Yeah, definitely an experience. I told some of the guys I work with, even experienced people, that I worked at the Exxon refinery one winter, and we were pulling lead shielded cable down a manhole into an open chamber under the ground with walls that looked like honeycombs full of holes, and that wire would go into one of those holes, and they were pulling it out of it, another manhole on the other end with a winch truck. And the only time I got to go down in the hole, which it was freezing cold up on the top, and we had to wear rubber boots, and your feet were frozen because there was ice on the ground. But when you went down the hole, you had to get down to your T-shirt because you would sweat.
It was sleeting.
Oh yeah, I remember. Because I had 2 jobs on that job. First job I had, I was the brakeman. As they were turning in that spool, whenever they told me to put the brakes on, I'd have to lean on this big board that was acting like a fulcrum on top of a big 12 by 12. And the end of the board was underneath the spool of wire, and the other end I'd set on it like a seesaw. And that's how I would put the brakes on. So I was the brakeman, and I was the wire or cable lubrication technician. They put me down in the hole. When I did get it down in the hole, I get down
nice,
there
huh?
with a 5-gallon bucket and a bag of drilling mud. Mix it up with water till it got to like a soupy paste. And when they started pulling wire, I'd have to take a big handful of that drilling mud out of that bucket and slam it into the hole where that wire was going to slick that wire up so it wouldn't drag inside that pipe. And as long as they were pulling that wire, I'd grab a handful of that mud out of that bucket and slap it into that wire. Keep on doing it until they stop pulling it.
How much more you need?
We're at an hour and 10 minutes.
But anyway, that was some of the experiences we had
Yeah.
doing some of those jobs. It was, like I said, I could sit down and talk a while about just work experiences of things that I did that I talked to guys, like I said, never did. They never experienced that kind of thing. Never did it before.
It seems like opportunity was there almost at each turn of the jobs. Whether you call it that or not, that's where you ended up at. You didn't have to look far. It really wasn't hard, was it?
No?
And then connections helped, Mr. Irving. That helped out.
Oh yeah, go getting a job.
Quite a bit.
Getting a job with Chevron, just you happened to know somebody that knew somebody, and then you got in touch with them, And of course, once you got in touch with him, then you had to, if you got offered a job, you had to prove you know how to do it, because they were looking for somebody to do that job. And if you could fill that position, so much the better for both sides. We found a job, they had a job offering, and they needed somebody to fill it.
Can you tell us a little bit about Ripley?
I worked with this fella when I worked in Pascagoula, Mississippi, a couple of years ago. There was this guy named Jim Ripley. He was an automation technician, and I was an electrician. And him and I ended up working together. And Ripley was old school because he used to be a lineman. You knew that, huh?
No.
Yeah, Ripley used to climb poles. He was a lineman at one time.
Slim was a lineman too.
He was an electrician. He worked as a lineman. He had a line truck and did a little bit of everything. But he became an automation technician with Chevron, automation specialist. And he was a character. But he was one of those guys that there wasn't nothing he couldn't do. He could build anything, work with anything. I mean, like I said, he was a lineman. I know he could weld. He could work on any kind of piece of equipment or instrumentation. The facility that we lived at.
But he had a lot to do with you, though, huh?
Well, me and him worked together because a lot of our work crossed over between automation and electrical, because a lot of automation equipment was battery operated. It took wind generators and solar panels and all of that. So that's all kind of tied in. So he and I worked real close together on a lot of that stuff. But like I said, Ripley was old school. If he had it in his mind that he was going to do something, he'd generally just go and do it. He thought it was better to beg for forgiveness than to ask for permission. That was his attitude. Yeah, he'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. So he'd go and do it.
Do it first.
And then see what the end result was after, if he had to answer to somebody about it. But generally, what he was doing was something to make something better. Make something work better, or to give us a better handle on how something worked, or optimize something. It wasn't for personal gain. It was always something he was trying to make work better. And so some of his ideas will look outlandish, a little wild, but generally he'd make them work. And more often than not, he could prove to his supervision that his way was the right way. They just didn't like being told after the fact. And they kind of got his butt in a bind there a couple of years later. They ended up having a downsizing, a layoff, and all that, and he got caught in that. They ended up laying his butt off. But it wasn't because he didn't know what he was doing. I learned a lot of things from him, just working with him, from things he knew from the electrical side that I wasn't aware of. Talking about balancing, I'll give you an example. It's something simple.
Let's talk about a recent thing that you and I and Gary have wound up with, trying to figure out what was going on. That's still funny to me.
What's that?
Them pins on the washing machine.
No.
That's something we work together. That's why I want to bring it up.
And I'll tell him what you're going to run across. Working on an old washing machine, trying to get one set up for Kelly to use in her apartment that she just moved into. And there was an old washing machine that was my grandmother's, my mama, who incidentally lived to be 103 years old. Well, Daddy had Mama's old washer and dryer. Kelly needed one, so it was an opportunity to get what she needed. Well, he remembered the washing machine having a leak, probably the water pump. So we ran it through a cycle. Sure enough, it was leaking. So we laid it down and we looked and we saw where it had rust around the shaft coming out the motor going in the water pump. So that's probably where it's at. Got to take the water pump out. Well, we got to looking at it and we figured out the only way we can get the water pump out is we'd have to pull the whole transmission, motor, pump, and everything out by the shaft going to the agitator. So unscrewed the agitator, pulled it out, undid the 3 bolts, holes the transmission in there, and pulled the whole thing out from the bottom. Well, we got that. Was able to take the water pump off of there, order another one to get it put back together. But then we noticed there was 3 or 4 of them.
3.
They had 3 little plastic cups mounted underneath the washer, facing up. And in those cups was a metal pin that had a hole in it. And when we looked at the whole carriage and assembly and all that, we could tell where all three, there was 3 holes on a stationary bracket, a floating bracket, and the transmission all lined up. If you would line them up, you could push that pin through there and it would line up. But we couldn't figure out what held the pin in there because I said, well, they all in these little plastic cups. If you stand it straight up, the little pins would fall in the cup with gravity. There's nothing to hold them in place. So we're trying to decide when we put this thing back together, when the new pump comes in, do we put the pins in there and put a cotter pin to keep them from falling out because obviously all them holes line up? Or what happens if we leave the pins out? So they put these little plastic cups there to catch these pins for a reason. So Gary comes over here one weekend. We're getting close to the time where the water pump's going to come in, and I'm going to have to put it back together. We need to figure out if it's going to work or not. So Gary, come here. Come take a look at this. We question him about them pins in those cups. Man, I don't know. But he looks at it. Again, we showed him how all the holes line up. You can put a pin through there. They got a hole in it, but there's no cotter pin. We turned the washing machine right side up, shook it a little while, couldn't find no cotter pins. Said it ain't there. Gary says the only thing I could figure is that looked like some kind of pins that was put in there for packing.
Shipping.
For shipping.
You're right.
Well, that's something to consider. So, well, what do you think when I put it back together? Put the pins in or leave them out? He said, I'd leave them out, see how it acts. So if it acts all right, you don't need the little cups or the pins. Well, ended up finding that particular model of machine on the internet. Looked it up. Found the owner's manual online. PDF file. I opened it up. I flipped through about 8 or 10 pages of it, and there it was. Grab this nylon strap from the back of the machine and pull it out until you see 3 cotter pins on it. And that tells me, and it also said if you don't pull it out, the washing machine could sit there from excessive vibration and it would make too much noise. So make sure you pull this shipping strip and these 3 cotter pins come out on it. I said, well, that explains what they're for. They're just for shipping. And I said, the pins fall into the cups. The cups are there so people don't see them laying on the floor thinking the piece of the washing machine coming off.
Gary had that thing figured out after a while.
He figured this probably had something to do with shipping. Didn't know for sure, but he said, that's what I would think.
Yeah.
Sure enough, that's what it ended up being. So we threw away the cups and the pins.
That's what you call working together.
Well, and that's from experience, too, of seeing stuff similar, maybe not the same thing, but he's seen something similar and just knows how things work.
Yeah.
Well, Mama can tell you when Gary was a little boy, she used to catch him taking apart the telephone. She'd see him just sitting there unscrewing the telephone and all that, and she asked him what he was doing. He just wanted to see what it looked like. How did it go together?
I'm going to tell on him, even if he's not here right now on that same subject matter. The fair is moving in at the school over there, and I'm a deputy, and I'm walking around making sure everything's all right before they open up. And Gary's with me. And Gary started fooling around with some of the equipment, the switching and everything. You want to know what they were for? The man looks at me and says, "He's your boy?" I says, "Yeah." He said, "Does he have to do that?" I said, "Yeah, he has to do that." But believe me, he had to. So, how much more you want? That's about enough, huh? You about through?